Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight for our first ever discussion in our Board Perspectives series. We have over 100 of you joining tonight from all ranges of the country, even in the UK. So if it's 2 a.m. and you're tuning in, thank you for being here. We are excited to dive right in. Our goal with this webinar series is to sit down with folks that are equally as passionate about our mission as we are, and we really want to provide some meaningful content and extended networking opportunities to our Talent Vault members. And also, if you're not in our Talent Vault, inquire more because we'd love to have you. For tonight's session, no better way to kick this off than starting with our two senior strategists, Deanna Oppenheimer and Phyllis Campbell. Before I turn it over to them, I will provide some brief intros, highlight the focus of our work here at BoardReady, and then after our discussion with both Phyllis and Deanna, we will have a moment for Q&A. So if you have any questions that come up as both Phyllis and Deanna are chatting, feel free to drop it in the chat and we'd love to answer those. If we haven't had the chance to connect, my name is Claudia Longo. I am the program associate here at BoardReady. I started last year coming off my undergraduate degree at the University of Washington, where I studied neuroscience and played soccer. So a bit of a pivot to BoardReady, but I am loving it and I could not be more stoked. And speaking of BoardReady, for those who maybe don't know, our mission is to diversify corporate boardrooms, and we do that in varying ways. Board Boost is our way to connect corporate clients with BoardReady individuals in our Talent Vault. We also have events and webinars like this one we are doing, and we also focus on thought leadership. So back in 2021, the team published a report called Lessons from the Pandemic, examining the link between board diversity and certain performance measures. So more to come on that. Stay tuned. But back to tonight's webinar, as I said, we have our senior strategists, Deanna and Phyllis. Deanna has quite an extensive career in financial services that she then brought to boardrooms both in the US and in Europe. Deanna, correct me if any of this is wrong, but you are currently the chair for IHG Hotels, a non-executive director at Thomson Reuters, and at Slalom. Previously was at Barclays, and then also sat on other boards such as Tesco, Whitbread, Joshua Green Corporation, and many others. But for the sake of time, I will move on to Phyllis, whose story also paints a similar picture. She's currently a board member at Remitly and the Air Transport Services Group, an advisory board member at SanMar and the Allen Institute. Last spring, she retired from her role as vice chairman and regional chair of the Pacific Northwest for JP Morgan Chase. I use the word retired lightly, as that's anything is not retired. And as we know of Phyllis and Deanna, they show no signs of slowing down anytime soon. In my humble opinion, I think boardrooms, companies, and the world at large are all better places because of these two. So super excited to turn it over to them. And I will start it off by Deanna asking you, I know I just gave a bit of a background, but tell us more about what you're currently up to, both in your professional career and your personal life.
Well, Claudia, first off, I think that one of the greatest accomplishments that I've had recently is finding you to bring you into BoardReady. So thanks so much for that great introduction, but thank you for all the work and all the innovation that you're bringing to our task here. So like Phyllis, one of the reasons that we have so much fun working together is we were bankers together for many, many decades back when there weren't a lot of women bankers. And so we've known each other back from our executive career. But now, over the last decade in my non-executive career, I've been doing three things. One is focused on board work. And the second is focused on trying to stay current and keep learning myself. And I've done that through a number of exciting ways. One is Slalom right now, who does so much work in AI and in technology. But the third is the give back, and that is trying to help others that are really incredibly capable to get to have their chance around a boardroom table and to diversify boards. And that's what we're doing here at BoardReady. So it's been a great opportunity to do that and a lot of fun. On the side, I'm having some fun traveling, spending some time with family, and all those good things that we like to do.
Awesome. And Phyllis, what about you?
Well, first of all, I just want to, Claudia, take a moment too and say thank you to you. I have to say, bringing Claudia aboard as a colleague for BoardReady was, I'll agree with Deanna, the best thing that could have happened to BoardReady. So if you want to get to know someone who's important at BoardReady, that's Claudia. And Deanna and I just sit back and generate lots of ideas, and Claudia actually implements them. So thank you, Claudia, and thanks for organizing today. And also, I want to say thank you to everybody who's joined, because I know a number of you sent me notes saying, I'm going to join the webinar, I'm excited about it. But I also would say back at all of you, you're paving the way as well. Many of you are already on boards. Some of you are looking for your second or third board. So you are paving the way too. And I just want to say, I know so many of you out there that are giving back and, really carrying the torch that Deanna and Claudia are carrying here. So just quickly, Claudia, I'm just going to sort of go to Deanna's three things. We have very parallel career paths, very parallel lives. We're good friends as well, which is wonderful. But my number one, as you just said, Claudia, I'm serving on a number of boards right now and have much of my executive career, which has been wonderful. And actually, it's been as I've learned as much as I've given, and I think that's one of my criteria for joining boards is, I know I'm going to give back, but what am I going to learn? So I tend to pick, different kinds of industries and businesses throughout my board career, and we can talk about that later. But that's probably the first thing. The second thing I'm doing is what Deanna just said. Continuous learning, and I've started a small consulting practice, a boutique consulting, and I'm helping mostly family-owned businesses, I'm finding, form boards and think about succession in their management as well as on the board. And it's really been rewarding. And I found that there's so many great businesses out there that, again, I've learned so much and been inspired by as I engage in my own consulting practice. And then the third one, Deanna just said, give back, which has always been important to me. And obviously, BoardReady is the one give back, as we've just talked about. But Claudia mentioned the Allen Institute. And Claudia, I know your major was neurology at the university. And, I just absolutely love learning from the smart scientists. I'm inspired by the work that Paul Allen started 20 years ago with open team science around mostly neurology. So it's just, I think that's kind of to close the loop. What Deanna is really saying, which is an important theme for today, is, never stop learning, but, just keep everything, read everything, which I do, and I try to connect the dots. But more than anything, I just try to learn new things every day. So it's a lot of fun, having fun. And trying to play a little golf, but
of course.
not very good golf.
No, that's great. Well,
Yeah.
just as you guys say you're learning something new every day, I have something new to learn from you both every day, and I know everyone on the stream feels the same way. So I want to rewind it now, kind of go back to 2017. Deanna, walk us through what starting BoardReady looked like. What was your inspiration? I know you kind of touched on a little bit of that, but really take us back there and talk to us about that.
Well, it really is interesting because these ideas kind of hatch around in your head. For all of you who have started something, you know how that works. You're kind of going, I don't know about this, but it crystallized and culminated at a breakfast that Phyllis and I were at with some other really interesting women that were doing board work as well. And we were starting to compare notes, and we sat there and we said, we're getting a lot of calls for boards, and what we're hearing from all these people that are coming in is saying, well, there's nobody else. If you won't do it, there's nobody else that's out there. And I sat there and we chatted, and we came up with a list of many, many, many diverse candidates that had an incredible ability to serve on boards that just were not known. And so we thought that there was a real not problem with the supply, but basically with the demand and matching the supply and demand. And that's what caused us to start BoardReady, was to try and connect up, one, the importance. And back in 2017, boards still needed to understand the importance of what diversity brings. It's amazing to think that. There were many people that we talked with, weren't there, Phyllis, that said, why do I diversify my boards? But that basically needed to be able to bring together the diversity of what they needed on their board with people that could serve. And that's how we started. And slowly but surely, we built up a number of different people in our talent vault and boards that we worked with.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I would love to hear from Phyllis too. Obviously you had started with Deanna back then, but now in 2024, the conversation is still continuing. So what inspires you, number one, to have been involved back then, but continue your involvement now?
Well, that's a really good question, Claudia, and I think reflecting on some of Deanna's comments, there was some progress there for a period of time. They were sort of in spurts from 2017, and I'll tell you, I'd say Deanna BoardReady deserves some credit, but there were a lot of other organizations that were working on it. Obviously, NASDAQ demanded, some diversity with their listed companies. We've got some of the proxy advisory firms that are pressuring companies to have more diversity on the board. So there's a lot of forces that came together, different state laws and so on. So I think all of this kind of came together, caused a spurt in more diverse placements, and particularly for women, which is great. And then the George Floyd, unfortunately, incident happened in 2020, and that spurred, a much greater call for ethnic diversity, especially for Black directors, which caused another, I would say, well needed and well timed, and well placed emphasis on more Black directors and other directors of color. So I think there's just been good progress, but not great. If I sit here today, and to your question, Claudia, I think the reason we formed BoardReady as a nonprofit, Deanna in particular said we need to be a nonprofit, is because we really wanted to say, look, this is not about us. This is not a self-serving mission at all. This is about the greater cause of diversity of thought on corporate boards, which is really lacking, and it's still lacking today. And I look at boards, at least in the US, and Deanna, you can talk about the UK in a bit, is there's no pressurization for turnover of directors. So there's still a preponderance of, white males on boards, usually older, usually, have been there for a very long time. And so that has not changed a lot. And now we've stalled out. This last year, the statistics show that there were not a significant number of appointments of women or people of color. So I guess what I'm worried about is that, and then I'm worried about the DEI pushback, because now we're getting state attorneys general who are, raising their, I guess, banners saying, look, corporations, you can't set goals, you can't, look at diverse pushes favoring women and minorities because, quote, it's not, quote, legal, that's not true. The higher ed ruling is not applicable to corporations. But I'm beginning to hear that, gee, maybe why do we need more diversity? We're just fine. So there's now kind of a complacency that's set in, and I think, we the three of us have talked about it along with our other colleagues on BoardReady, and we said, we've now got to start raising our game, raising the visibility of the issue again, all under the banner of diversity of thought and diversity of, what I would say is voices that really add to the, I guess, good go forward strategy for the companies that are out there. So,
Yeah, no,
anyway.
I think one of the comments that I'd pick up on as well is inclusion.
Inclusion.
The real opportunity here is that we are facing now into a world that is changing faster than it's ever changed before. And that is basically coming into a way that is really, really challenging. And that means we need all voices around a board table to be heard, to be included, and we need as much diversity, as Phyllis says, as possible. Because what we did in the past is not going to be 100% applicable for the future, and we will need to move at a speed of pace. I think one of the things that we've really enjoyed with, Phyllis and I have both done a lot of, is mentoring. And as a mentor, you get a lot more from the person, particularly if it's a multi-generational side of it, that you are learning than what you're doing kind of coming back. So I do think that this topic, as Phyllis says, you can't be complacent, and that whatever diverse thought that you are bringing, we need to have a lot of inclusion around the board table.
And I just sort of make one quick note to your point, Deanna. That's where a good lead director or independent chair really earn his or her money, in my view, is because that person typically sits at the board table and really listens for the voices that need to be heard. That sometimes, like my voice, sometimes I'm quieter. I tend to think before I talk. But, I think part of it is some people need to really think through their ideas, and sometimes they don't get airtime at the board table. So having, I'm just sort of including this as a footnote, if you become a lead independent director or chair of the board, and Deanna has been in that position many, many times because she's a superb listener. She gets inclusion. She gets every voice heard at the table. And that's, to me, an important role that women play, by the way, because I think we just tend to listen more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how you guys talk about diversity of thought. I think that's so important. Everyone kind of uses the term diversity, but no, it's really diversity of thought, and that's kind of all encompassing. I know you both touched on kind of being a chair or a lead director and all of that. So let's rewind. Phyllis, bring us back. What was your first role in the boardroom? And for individuals in this webinar looking to land their first seat, what would you highlight as 3 key points of entry?
3 key points. Okay. Thank you for having me boil it down. Okay. Well, I think the first thing was my point of entry, and that actually is a significant point, though I do get stereotyped in the audit risk committee because of my financial services background. I'm actually okay with that because it is a good entry point for boards and for those of you that have either an audit background or financial background or risk background. It's a great entry point because every board in the world is looking for, especially, audit, yes, but especially the risk notion. And particularly for those of you that are cyber experts, that's such a great entry point. So, I would say that would be one, is what's your kind of core expertise, comp. There's so many needs out there that boards are looking for. Everybody's talking about Gen AI. So what's your point of entry? And mine just happens to be audit risk. So that's kind of point 1, Claudia. I'd say point 2 is that, I think I had a good network. I've always had a good network. I really think that the network has really mattered. And I've shown up at places, and I actually got my first board, which is your question, from sitting on the Seattle Chamber Board. And when I spoke, I think one person came up to me and said, "I love the way you frame not just thoughts, but good questions." And I was just thinking, would you be interested in, standing for election in our board of directors? And it never occurred to me that I was not, certainly not in the market for a board at that time, but it was being observed, I guess, in these nonprofit board settings and really getting people to know who you are, how you think, and that really mattered for my first 1 or 2 board appointments. And then the third thing I'd say, Claudia, is, since you're having me boil it down, is, I do think that everybody's looking for, back to Deanna's original point about learning everything, the point, and just being intellectually curious, is people are really looking for how relevant are you? And I think one of the things that I've always prided myself in my day job and outside my day job, is just being intellectually curious. So a lot of times with people, I just follow up and I say, you said something in that meeting. Could I buy you a cup of coffee? I'm really interested in what you had to say, and follow up and develop those relationships, but more importantly, trying to find out more. And, again, that led to somebody saying to me, you asked, you're always curious about the next thing and the next thing. And the next thing I know, you're really thinking about it in a strategic framework. So, figure out ways to demonstrate that, because every one of you on this call I know has that. I've learned so much from Deanna, for sure, in that context. But I think part of it is just having a place to show up and be seen, and then have people get familiar with you. And that again has probably led to a lot of open doors for me.
Yeah, that's great. Deanna, anything to add?
No, I think that Phyllis really hit on one thing that is important. As I talk to a lot of people that want to get on boards, one of the analogies that I use is, it's like you throw a pebble in to the water and there's ripples. you have to start with the ripples that are closest to your experience. And that means that if you've had a big career in financial services, as both Phyllis and I have had, I've had the good fortune on serving on many other boards in other industries, but it started with financial services. The first time I got picked was because I had a background in mortgage and lending and for the board that I went on to. So it's really important that you understand what your core competencies are, and then you look at opportunities to match those. And you have an elevator pitch about yourself. So when you do get an opportunity to talk to somebody about a board, you don't wander all around with everything else and all the things you'd like to see and all those things. It's, these are the three things that I would bring to your board. And I've looked at your background of your company, and you've articulated in your annual report that these are important things for you. So I think it's that match close to your expertise to get started.
Yeah, and could I add something? Because you asked Claudia about the first board, and I was just reflecting back on my first board, and I was thinking, my first board, I think there was one other woman on the board in a 12-person board. It was a pretty large board by today's standards. And I remember, though, thinking to myself, being a woman, person of color, a couple times it got ignored, a couple times, this just happens, right? But I think part of it was I really had to summon my self-confidence to say, look, I was asked to be on this board. I do have a right to have a seat at the table. And just because I said something and it got ignored and it was said 5 minutes later by a guy at the table, everybody thought it was a great point. That should not diminish my sense of saying to myself, oh, gee, you didn't say it right, or your self-talk kicks in. So the observation I'd probably share, which is a little bit about Deanna's elevator pitch, is have a very confident elevator pitch. But to me, I would say I had to believe it too, and I had to really believe it when I sat at that board table. And, I was new. I was one of the few there sitting there. And that's not an easy place to be when you're both new and different than everybody else at the table. But I think, just having that self-confidence at the table to say, look, you were asked to be there. You've got a point of view. You've got experience that's needed. Speak up. Make sure that, you ask good questions, yes. But I think moreover, for me, it was just getting my self-confidence and my sea legs, to say, hey, I actually have a place at this table.
Yeah, I like that. Well, okay, so you have the confidence, you have your elevator pitch. How do individuals, rewind? What do they do to take the next steps in their board journeys? What are good ways that they can start showing people that they want to be on these boards? They have all these tools. They're ready to take the next steps. What should they be doing?
Well, I think the first thing is that, one, I'll put in another selfless pitch here, join the talent vault. I think that's always a good thing here for BoardReady. But it's really, again, important that you think about what type of board it is and what type of organization it is that you are going to serve on. So if you have never had any public company experience and you have never been a public company executive and you have never, ever served on a public company board, picking General Motors as your first target is probably not what you want to be doing. But if you have started up some tech firms and you've been a part of a startup and you've led some of those, you've maybe IPO'd a company, you start to look at those areas that have companies that have characteristics that you share that same experience with. So again, I know I'm probably beating a dead horse on this point, but it's the same thing true on how you target the boards. The second thing is I heard a great example from one of our Talent Vault people who went out and she said she had public company experience, she had IPO experience, really a great tech leader, and she wanted a private board and she wanted a public board. So she basically went through all the work, and it's a lot of work, of targeting all those private companies, seeing all the ones that had board members that were moving along, and actually also then looking at where the needs that she could meet. She did the same thing on public boards, And she methodically networked then to start meeting people through search firms, through other board members, through forums like this. And finally, she ended up at the end of, probably too long a period of time from her standpoint, but definitely getting that board. So networking is crucial. Meeting with introductions of everybody that you see is crucial. But again, really understanding that match is important, and being able to start where there is a need for your skills and then working your way through. The final thing I'll say here too, Claudia, is board work is not for everybody. I often say a board member, the difference is between an executive and a board member is like the difference between a parent and a grandparent. Parent and an executive, you're calling all the shots. You're making all the decisions. You are working through everything. As a non-executive director, you are the grandparent. You are stepping in and helping to shape things that are very important. You are not instructing, you are emphasizing, and you are helping people learn. And if things go really bad, you do need to step in. But it's a very different approach, because there is nothing more frustrating than the executive that walks into a boardroom and says, well, we used to do it this way at ABC Company, or we used to do that. So again, Phyllis talked about the importance of framing questions. That becomes really, really crucial as well.
Yeah, I want to pick up, Claudia, on one of Deanna's points, and I have a couple more maybe to add. The one point is a board is not for everybody. And I talk to a lot of people who say, well, how many hours a week do you spend on a board? I hear it's maybe 2 to 3 hours a week on average. And I say, yes, that's true. However, to Deanna's point, if there's an issue, a problem, a merger, a spinoff, an activist, I mean, honest to God, I think on some boards, or a CEO change or sudden succession, unplanned succession, you can be up to sometimes 10, 12, 15 hours a week with phone calls, with just all kinds of things, special committees. If there's a problem, there's generally special committees that are formed to the board. And it can be almost a full-time job with, to Deanna's point, not the influence and necessarily authority to make the change, but, really you're just in there recommending, trying to get things back on even keel. And if it's a merger, there's just lots and lots of analysis that goes into that. So I guess what I would say is just go in with eyes wide open. On average, that's probably true, that it's, a part-time job. It's very rewarding. There's, in my view, more benefits than there are downsides to serving on a board. But boy, the time, you have to have the time. And you have to, when I had a full-time working career, as you were saying, Claudia, juggling even 2 outside public company boards. Most weeks fine, but some weeks, wow, I was working weekends, evenings, I'm putting in very, very long hours outside of my day job. So it is just something to think about, and just make sure that you have the time. And as Deanna and I always like to say, don't collect boards like postage stamps, because, just putting checks on the wall and saying, oh, I have now 4 or 5 public company boards, that to me is it's a big flag, and also the SEC thinks it's a big flag these days, but it can take a lot of time. So I did want to make that point and underscore, Deanna, what you said. And then the second point about things to think about, which is what Deanna just said, is when you decide you want to serve on a board, be very targeted. What's the culture of the company? Who are you aligning your reputation with? And that to me is extremely important, because you're aligning your own personal reputation, your whole history that you've built up, with the board members you're serving with, and with the company and the executives on whose board you're serving. And I can assure you, we can all look back on the wall of shame of all these companies that have not succeeded and done well and have had major problems. And everybody looks to the board and says, where was that board? And I have to say, that's really an important consideration. So do think about that. And then when you do decide, these are the 3 or 4 companies that I'm interested in, to Deanna's point, really going at it in a surgical way. Who do I know on the GovNom committee? Do I know the CEO? Do I know some of the management team that could, add where I could get to know them, maybe add some value, they get to know me, and then over time, maybe the board becomes open to me, the board opportunity. So I think just being really surgical about it and looking at the 4 or 5 companies that are aligned with your values and your culture and that you'll learn something and all your criteria, then go for it. And there's no reason to not be very assertive about why you would be a good addition. And I would say to you, having chaired GovNob committees, guys are much more forward about saying, I want to be on your board and here's why I'm qualified. End of story. Here's my resume. And I don't see a lot of women doing that. And I'm not recommending being that aggressive, but I think there's a way to go about it and to be more assertive to say, I don't know if there would be an opportunity, but if there is, I wanted you to know I'm very interested in your company. To Deanna's point, I've done my research. I'm very interested. I think I can add value in these areas. Would you keep me on a list? And it's really almost as simple as that. And I know it's hard sometimes to do that, but you got to do it. So that's, I think, the next thing I would say. And then probably the last thing I'd say is, as Deanna already said, don't exclude private companies, privately held companies. I mean, I get the privilege of working with a number of them, and they are really looking for good board members. And honestly, they actually are more flexible. You're not spending all your half your meeting with SEC requirements and reading 10Ks and, trying to check all the boxes with all of the, really all of the regulatory things that publicly traded companies tend to put you through. So privately held family businesses, there's a lot of really good ones around. Don't exclude that. There are some private equity funded companies that are really, really good too. But, again, I think just do your homework, ask yourself, is this a place I want to, spend some time, could be a considerable amount of time, or these people I want to hang out with? Is this a place I want to lend my reputation into? And, if you do, it's a very rewarding experience. I would say I always felt it made me a better executive. And I'm sure, Deanna, you'd say the same thing.
Exactly. And in fact, I think that for those of you that are executives, if you can sit on one outside board, if your company will let you, you have the time to do it, it really is a great opportunity because one, it gives you board experience. So if you do want to leave, when you leave executive life and do a portfolio like Phyllis and I are doing, you already have that one under your belt that helps you with. But the second thing is that you can see how another HR department works, how another finance organization prints its numbers and what it does, how other executives interact. And so you take a lot of those learnings back for yourself, which is important. In terms of your network, there's 2 key areas that I want to make sure, in addition to the company themselves, that you make sure you focus on. One are search firms. I think in places like the UK, 90% plus of the searches are done by a search firm for board work. That's because there's a corporate governance code that actually stipulates a number of different things. That's one of them, that you either must advertise out in the public or you must have a search firm outside of just the board itself. But even in the US, there's a growing preponderance of search firms, searches that are being done by search firms. And that's because it's tougher to find. You don't just look at all the past CEOs that have retired out. You now need people like digital expertise, cyber that Phyllis talked about earlier, and a number of different expertises. So if you are an executive and you've worked with a search firm to hire other people in your organization, certainly go back to that individual and ask to be introduced to their people who focus on board work within their firm. So that's one area. The second area is like BoardReady, where we provide networks and things that we want to do with our talent vault and members and connect that into various things. There are a plethora of other organizations that are doing that today now for diverse candidates. And many of them are on our website as our partners. So we'd encourage you to go onto the boardready.io website and look at those partnerships and just find them yourselves. But the best part is, I think that, Phyllis said it earlier, how you show up in what you're doing. She showed up in a nonprofit board and somebody noticed and said, that's a skill set I'd like around my company board table. So there's a number of different ways that you can go out and start to really build your network back into the boardroom.
Yeah, it's a process, definitely. Not that I would know, but based on what you guys have all told me, right? This actually ties into a question that we received. Coming back to, obviously, you guys were in operating roles and then you kind of transitioned into advising roles. One of the questions we have is, how is a seat in the boardroom different? Like, how do you manage your portfolio as more of an advisor versus when you were in this operating role?
So let's make one clarification there. So there are two types of boards, and Phyllis and I have both been on them. And one is a fiduciary board. And that is the one that Phyllis is talking about, where she's served as a nom-gov chair, where she has, been a lead independent director. I chair Intercontinental Hotel Group and Resorts. Those are fiduciary boards. That's part of the governance. Those have investors that are holding that board accountable for ultimately the strategy, culture, and performance of the company. That is a fiduciary board role. The second, though, which are really fun and interesting, and both Phyllis and I have served on advisory boards. And Claudia, that's what you have just talked about there, which is where there's a CEO that usually it's a private company, that he or she wants to have a board that is not a fiduciary. You're not sitting there signing off the numbers or doing anything, but they want a sounding board. And they want to be able to talk with them and learn a lot about what's out there. So those are two types. They are different. They take different amounts of risk for the individual board member as well. So you'll want to be looking at that. So when you start to transition, you look at first, do I want to be accountable for the performance of a company where I am not making every decision? Again, as a board, you're a team sport. This is like soccer. When you're on the soccer pitch, you don't control every move that all your teammates are making. So you want to make sure that is that something that I want to be doing. And then two, you start to look at classes. There's some incredible classes available. There are some incredible resources available, and you really need to learn the craft of what it means to be a good director.
Yeah, and the only thing that I would say is there is with the fiduciary boards, you are also liable, and so that's the other side of the coin. Is I hate to say it, but there's a lot of litigation firms out there that specialize in litigating. Every time you buy a company or sell a company or a subsidiary, you're going to get sued. And I've been sued 4 or 5 times. Luckily, the D&O insurance covered it. We had good legal counsel, but it is just the way of life with a fiduciary board. You're responsible, accountable, you're liable. Again, D&O insurance will in almost all cases covers it, but it's a pain, when you have to go through that process. The advisory board, as Deanna said, is more giving advice. You may be just as engaged, which I am right now with Sanmar as an advisory director, just as engaged. We have the same kinds of formal agendas. We go through strategy, succession, talent management, comp, all the things that the board goes through, but we're not sitting there dealing with SEC matters and all the things that Deanna just articulated. The other part of the question, though, Claudia, is a little bit, it may not have been part of the question, but I wanted to touch on it, is one of the hardest things, though, on sitting on any board is to, the nose in, fingers out. And the nose in is you have the right to ask any question of management, to question assumptions, to ask those questions we talked about earlier. You don't have the right to run the business. And so what I found hard was, I'm an operator. I've always been an operator up until a year ago. And, I just want to get in there and say, if you just did that, and that, everything would just be fine. And this is the way, it needs to be done. But that's not my role on a board. So there's a fine line, and it's an art as much as a science, and the CEO and usually the lead director tend to set the pace there. But it's sometimes hard to kind of respect that line. And I would say I've had to learn over the years that, it is a fine line, and there's places when I need to back off or I've been told to back off appropriately.
Yeah, no, I definitely like that distinction of nose in, fingers out. Kind of along those lines, as you're leaning in the boardroom, one of our other questions that was asked is, what strategies do you use to stay informed about trends and best practices relevant to your board responsibilities?
Oh, that's a great question. And, I said earlier, be curious about everything. And, I really do enjoy reading. Probably 70% of what I read is, The Economist and business magazines, and obviously try to watch CNBC, Bloomberg News, NHK. I mean, I tend to just consume media as much as I can on daily news. But I think the thing that what I really then try to do is to pause and then think about, can this affect my company? How can this affect, how does one thing affect another? If it's, a war in the Middle East, what is it doing to supply chain? All the questions that come up. I mean, obviously the economic and geopolitical consequences affect everything in this world today. So I think part of it is just being really aware of not just consuming lots of sources of data, but connecting the dots and asking how one thing affects another. And so that's that sort of intellectual, I guess, agility, I would say.
Yeah, and I think that this is one of the really big advantages of getting to serve on boards is you have board colleagues that if you have picked the right board, as Phyllis talked about earlier, there are some really smart people. And that's where, kind of the fingers out, nose in.
Right.
Exactly. Analogy works, but it's also the, 2 ears, 1 mouth. Listening to a lot of your colleagues, you are going to learn a lot. And that is very exciting. Then there's some great resources. Again, University of Washington, your alma mater, where Phyllis is out as a Fritzky chair right now. They have some incredible resources, classes and things for board directors. NASD, which is, again, a association, has a lot of really terrific information. So you can get information, but also as you go into a portfolio, that's one of the big advantages, is you'll learn something on one board that will apply to another. Or you'll learn something if you're in your executive career that will apply to that board. So it is really vital that you not only read, you not only attend webinars and a variety of different things, but you listen to a lot of the fascinating people around you.
Yeah, that's a great point. Listening and learning. That's what I do with both of you two. So that's...
Well, I like Deanna's 2 ears, 1 mouth. Boy, that's a good one. The NIFO and 2 ears, 1 mouth. I think everybody will at least take away a couple things.
Yeah, absolutely. Some good analogies too. I know the mom versus the grandma kind of analogy is really good. That's a good way to put it. So it doesn't resonate with me quite yet, but I know, Deanna, it does with you, as you have 2 little grandchildren now too, which is super exciting. But unfortunately, we are coming to the end of this webinar, and that was the last question we had time for. But thank you all so much for joining here tonight. Really insightful conversations, really great questions coming into the chat. Just wanted everyone to know that, again, this is our first session. So if you have any feedback or anything that you want to see moving forward in the future, we are very open to any of that. Again, this is designed for you all as members of our Talent Vault, and we are just so excited to kick it off. So wanted to turn it over to you, Deanna and Phyllis, if you guys have any last second thoughts.
Well, the thing that I would just say, and one, thank you all for tuning in. Again, we will keep resources coming out of not only our LinkedIn BoardReady postings that we have, but also off of our website and looking at more information coming off that side. So I'd encourage you to come into that. But thanks for taking the time to listen. We're kind of novices in here going in with this LinkedIn chat, so your feedback would be absolutely brilliant and appreciated.
Yes, and we'd love to hear from you through Claudia or through LinkedIn. What other subjects would you like to hear throughout the year? Because we're going to continue this. We're going to have some fantastic speakers as part of this series. But I would just say thank you for being mentors and opening doors to all of you. I mean, Deanna and I are certainly out there all the time. We're working, as Deanna said, being mentors ourselves, but all of you too are making a difference. And I think every one of us opening a door for somebody else and putting in a good word and, just really making sure that we all have an opportunity out there. And if we can't do something, recommend 3 other women or call Claudia and get some talent vault names. That's what we do. And I think, that's how we're going to make a difference in the end. So I just want to say thank you because I know you're all doing it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both again. Great to see you and talk to you all soon. Thanks, everyone.